Long before the first vault door ever opened, the world still believed in its own perfection. Cities glittered with advertisements promising forever, and machines hummed promises of control over everything, even nature, even consequence. Fallout's world wasn't destroyed by greed alone. It was undone by a quiet belief that progress would never ask for payment. The Great War wasn't a moment of explosion. It was a slow inhale, held too long. The years leading up to the end were filled with bright colors and hollow joy. Television jingles for new models of Mister. Handy robots played on repeat. Families smiled around synthetic dinners, and the air smelled faintly of ozone from all the machines pretending to make life easier. Beneath that cheerfulness was exhaustion, an entire planet stretched thin by too many promises. Every nation wanted the future, but none wanted to share it. Oil wells ran dry, resources vanished like spilled light. When the end came, it wasn't from hatred, it was from running out of ways to pretend there was enough. In the final hours of peace, the world glowed brighter than ever before. City skylines burned with neon, traffic filled the streets, and factories still poured smoke into air that couldn't hold it anymore. And then, almost without warning, silence. The Great War lasted less than a single day, but its echo has lasted for centuries. Every Fallout story is just that echo trying to find its voice again. Beneath the ashes of civilization, humanity survived inside steel coffins called vaults. They were sold as salvation, but built as experiments, laboratories hidden beneath the illusion of safety. Some studied human behavior under isolation. Others tested psychological endurance. A few were designed simply to fail. Vault-Tec's true mission wasn't preservation, it was observation. The apocalypse became data collection. And so, when the world above went quiet, the vaults below began to whisper. Life inside a vault was orderly, at first. Lights flickered on and off in perfect cycles. Food dispensers hummed quietly, and announcements promised stability. But people aren't made to live without sky. Over years, generations even, cracks formed not in walls, but in minds. Some vaults fell to paranoia, others to despair, a few to ambition. The world below became a reflection of the one above, smaller, but just as human. The great irony of Fallout's history is that the safest places always created the strangest futures. When the doors finally opened, the air outside felt heavier than expected. The surface was silent, but alive in strange new ways. Trees no longer grew straight, animals no longer looked familiar. Radiation didn't kill the world, it rewrote it. Grass turned gray, rivers shimmered green, and the sky hung low and tired. But among all that ruin, beauty returned in unfamiliar shapes. Humanity had changed, but so had the land. The apocalypse had become nature's art form. In the ruins of Washington, the monument still stood, broken and cracked, but proud. Birds nested in the empty domes of power, and vines crawled up marble walls that once echoed speeches. The Capitol wasteland became a strange kind of museum history, displayed not through glass, but through absence. People scavenged what they could, built towns out of wreckage, and called it progress. Fallout survivors weren't rebuilding civilization, they were redefining it. Further west, the Mojave stretched in quiet defiance. Its heat was ancient, its silence perfect. The war had scarred it, but not conquered it. Cities like New Vegas rose from the sand, not as symbols of hope, but as acts of memory, bright lights pretending to be stars. There, humanity rediscovered its favorite lie, that glamour could outshine grief. Neon replaced faith, casinos replaced governments, but even in that glittering oasis, You could still hear the wind reminding everyone who really owned the desert. The Commonwealth told a different story, one of invention repeating its own mistakes. Deep beneath its ruins, a group called the Institute rebuilt science itself. They made machines that thought like people, then wondered why people began to fear them. The synths weren't the end of humanity, they were its reflection, clearer than any mirror. In Fallout's world, creation always carries regret. Every great discovery comes with a quiet apology built into its design. The Brotherhood of Steel kept that regret polished like a religion. Born from soldiers who saw too much power fall into the wrong hands, they swore to protect technology from humanity itself. Their armor gleamed, their rules were rigid, and their faith was mechanical. They became knights of circuitry, chasing lost machines across deserts that no longer needed saving. They believed they were guarding the past, but in truth, they were guarding fear, the fear that mankind could not be trusted with its own brilliance. The Enclave, hiding in the shadows, dreamed of restoring purity to a world that had outgrown it. They saw mutation as infection, radiation as sin. Their vision of America was one without error, without change, without forgiveness. But the wasteland doesn't forgive stagnation, it devours it. And so the Enclave's dream burned, not in fire, but in irrelevance. The New World had no room for perfection. Between these powers, between vaults and armies, wanderers walked alone. They carried stories instead of weapons, compassion instead of conquest. Every player in Fallout, every survivor who steps out of a vault or crawls from rubble, becomes part of that quiet tradition. The wasteland doesn't reward strength, it rewards patience, it rewards those who listen. Sometimes, in the ruins of old cities, you can find music still playing, a record spinning endlessly on a broken turntable, repeating the same few seconds of melody. It's haunting, but beautiful. Fallout's world is built on repetition mistakes, repeated, songs repeated, lives repeated, until they become comfort. Even destruction finds rhythm when you live with it long enough. And somewhere, far beyond any map, the sky still glows faint green. That glow isn't radiation anymore. It's memory, a permanent sunset over what once was. The world of Fallout is not a tragedy. It's a lullaby, a reminder that even in ruin, life continues, softly, stubbornly, and endlessly curious. The earth doesn't end, it just changes shape until it feels peaceful again. The world before the war had forgotten how to look up. Skyscrapers had grown so tall that people stopped seeing the sky, and the lights never went out long enough to show the stars. When the bombs fell, it wasn't just buildings that disappeared. It was wonder. The Great War stripped the world bare, leaving only silence where ambition used to live. But silence, as the Fallout world shows, has its own kind of beauty. It lets the planet breathe again. In the early years after the fire, people crawled out of bunkers and basements into a world that didn't seem real. The air shimmered with dust that glowed at night. The rivers whispered in strange new colors, and the sky hung still like glass. Some survivors called it cursed, others called it holy. There's a line between ruin and rebirth, and in Fallout, no one ever truly knows which side they're standing on. Nature came back first. It always does. Grass found ways to grow through concrete, trees twisted into new forms, and animals returned as something changed, but fearless. The first mutated creatures weren't monsters. They were evolution, accelerated. Brahmin with 2 heads, geckos with glowing skin, insects the size of birds, each one proof that life never needs permission. The old world's rules had vanished, and the new one had no interest in replacing them. Then came the Wanderers, people who carried what they could and started walking. Fallout's history is full of them. Scavengers, traders, lost souls, and quiet dreamers. They followed the remains of highways, slept in cars that still smelled of dust and plastic, and built new lives inside the skeletons of the old. The wasteland never gives comfort, but it gives space. Space to think, to grieve, to begin again. It is not empty, it's waiting. The vaults began to open one by one, like seeds cracking under sunlight. Some released people who believed they were stepping into paradise. Others released those who had stopped believing in anything at all. Each vault's story became a parable, small lessons about humanity's ability to endure and to destroy itself at the same time. Others learned only how to fear. In the end, every vault told the same story. Safety without freedom is just a quieter apocalypse. The Brotherhood of Steel spread across the land like missionaries carrying relics instead of scripture. They gathered broken machines and called them sacred, turning the remnants of technology into a faith of preservation. They meant well, at first. They believed they were protecting the world from itself, but over time, the line between guardianship and control faded. Knowledge became possession. The Brotherhood forgot that the world doesn't need saving, it needs understanding. In the shadows, the Enclave tried to rebuild the America they remembered, but memory is fragile when it becomes obsession. They saw the New World as an infection to be purged. But what they didn't see was that the wasteland had already healed, just in a way that didn't match their reflection. The Enclave's dream of purity was never survival, it was denial. The Fallout world thrives on imperfection. It's the only thing that still grows. Across the deserts, the NCR tried to bring order through law, but law is hard to plant in sand. They built fences and roads, outposts and flags, and tried to convince the world it could be tamed again. But the Mojave isn't something you control, it's something you learn to live with. The NCR's power stretched wide, but their reach was always shallow. The wasteland isn't a land that rewards authority, it rewards balance. And then, there were those who found comfort in Chaos Raiders, scavengers, mercenaries who lived by instinct. They weren't villains, not really. They were people who learned too early that structure was a lie. Their violence was their way of singing. In Fallout, morality isn't divided between good and evil. It's measured in the moments people choose to still be kind when kindness has no purpose. Even in the quietest corners of the world, machines still remember the old order. Robots wander endlessly through the ruins, performing tasks no one asked for anymore. Protectrons sweep floors in buildings that have no roofs. Mr. Handy units water plants that no longer grow. They aren't broken, they're faithful. In a strange way, the machines of Fallout are the most human things left. They follow routine because it gives them comfort. Repetition is its own kind of prayer. The wasteland learned to glow. The radiation that once terrified humanity became its backdrop, a soft halo around the bones of civilization. It lights the edges of crumbling highways, paints rivers in green and gold, and hums quietly through the night. It's not a warning anymore. It's a lullaby. In Fallout's world, even poison has learned how to sing softly. There are still places where the old world pretends to exist. A diner with one working neon sign, a house with a photo still framed on the wall, a broken jukebox playing Silence. These small details are how Fallout speaks. It never shouts its history. It leaves it scattered, like breadcrumbs for dreamers who still care enough to listen. Somewhere, out there, radios continue to play. Their signals drift endlessly through the air, carrying voices that have forgotten they're alone. "Good morning, Wasteland," they say, over and over, to no one in particular. Those transmissions are the world's heartbeat proof that memory itself refuses to die. And at night, when the world goes still and the air cools and the lights of New Vegas or Boston or Washington flicker against the stars, the land hums again. It's the sound of endurance, the slow rhythm of a planet that has learned to survive its children. Fallout's universe is not one of destruction, it's one of patience. The bombs didn't end life, they just reminded it to rest. Beneath the surface of the wasteland, under the rubble and rust, lies a story that has no clear beginning. It's the story of ambition buried under its own weight. Vault-Tec called it progress, but it was really prophecy disguised as research. Before the Great War, while the world above debated oil and borders, Vault-Tec built sanctuaries beneath the earth, promising safety from the inevitable. But safety, in Fallout's world, always comes with fine print. Each vault was a reflection of human curiosity stretched too far. Vault 78, filled with musicians, sealed away to study the endurance of art without audience. Vault 11 taught guilt by forcing impossible moral choices. Vault 81 turned its residents into caretakers of hidden experiments they never consented to. They weren't shelters, they were mirrors. Every vault showed humanity exactly what it feared to admit, that even in perfect isolation, people still find ways to break what they love. In the years after the bombs, these vaults became legends. Wanderers told stories about them around campfires, each tale more unbelievable than the last. Some said a vault contained people who never stopped dancing. Others swore there was one filled only with clones who thought they were free. In the wasteland, truth doesn't matter as much as endurance. Stories survive because people need something to hold in their hands when the wind takes everything else away. Far from the vaults, in the burned-out shells of cities, new religions began to grow. The children of Adam were born not from madness, but from awe. They looked at radiation and saw light. To them, the glow wasn't poison, it was divinity. The Great War was not the end, but the moment creation began again. They prayed to the splitting of the atom, believing that every flash of nuclear fire was a whisper from their God. To outsiders, they seemed insane, but to the wasteland, they made perfect sense. Faith is just another way of surviving what you can't control. Some of the children wandered alone, blessing puddles of glowing water, tracing signs in the dust, or building shrines from melted glass. Others gathered in great cathedrals made from old warheads, singing to the sound of ticking Geiger counters. And when they spoke, their voices were calm, not angry, not fearful, just certain. They didn't fear the end. They had already accepted it. Fallout's world has always blurred the line between worship and surrender. Above the ground, ruins stood like cathedrals of another kind. Power plants, skyscrapers, old freeways looping endlessly toward nowhere. The bones of technology became temples of memory. People walked through them like archaeologists of their own species, touching the cold metal walls and wondering who they had been before the fire. The wasteland doesn't hide its ghosts. It lets them stand in plain sight, sun-bleached and silent. The Great War wasn't fought for land or pride, though both were claimed as excuses. It was fought for energy, the last resource worth killing for. When the old world ran out of oil, it tried to replace it with invention, fusion, robotics, automation, the miracles of tomorrow, built too quickly and too confidently. The more power humanity found, the less it understood what it was meant to do with it. In Fallout's history, brilliance always arrives a moment too late to save itself. In the final days before the bombs fell, there were rumors of peace talks. People spoke of treaties that might have stopped the inevitable, but peace in Fallout has always been a luxury no one can afford. When the sirens wailed, No one knew who fired first, and maybe that's the truth the world needed to forget. The end of civilization wasn't caused by one side winning, it was caused by everyone thinking they still could. Afterward, the survivors became storytellers. They looked at the ruins and gave them meaning. Even if that meaning was invented, humans can't help but narrate survival. Every broken highway, every empty town becomes a parable. A rusted sign becomes a warning. A crater becomes a reminder. A skeleton in a chair becomes a lesson about waiting too long. Fallout's world doesn't explain itself because it doesn't need to. The stories write themselves in dust and decay. The Brotherhood of Steel kept one kind of history. The followers of the Apocalypse kept another. The Brotherhood guarded the past like treasure. The followers shared it like a gift. Between them stretched the eternal argument who deserves knowledge. In the wasteland, information is more dangerous than bullets. The right idea in the wrong hands can reshape continents, and the wrong idea in the right hands can create hope that lasts centuries. Meanwhile, far from all that order, the super mutants roamed. Once human, now caught between species, they were the unintentional children of a virus meant to save mankind. The forced evolutionary virus didn't fail. It succeeded too well. It erased weakness, but also identity. Fallout's history of science is never about success or failure. It's about misunderstanding what better means. The ghouls told another side of that story. People who survived radiation not by luck, but by mutation. Their skin cracked and their voices rasped, but they lived for centuries. Sometimes they remembered what the world was, and that memory became both curse and comfort. They are Fallout's poets, living reminders that time itself can't decide what's human. They wander not because they're lost, but because the world around them keeps dying while they don't. And somewhere beyond all these stories, beyond the factions and ruins, the world continues to hum. Not with machines, not with traffic, but with quiet persistence. The wasteland isn't dying. It's breathing differently. The old world burned away its excess, and what remained was pure in its simplicity. No governments, no corporations, just wind, dust, and the slow rebuilding of life. The Fallout universe reminds us that endings aren't always violent. Sometimes they're quiet. Sometimes the loudest sound in the apocalypse is just the ticking of a Geiger counter beneath the stars. In that rhythm, steady, patient, almost musical, the world learns how to exist again. Not as it was, but as it chooses to be. And in that stillness, among ruins and relics, something resembling peace takes root. In the centuries after the Great War, the silence began to fill again. Not quickly, not loudly, but patiently, like sand drifting into the shape of dunes. Humanity never truly disappeared. It simply forgot what it was supposed to become. Fallout's post-war world was not a clean slate. It was a smudged page, still legible in places, still worth reading if you turned your head just right. The first settlements rose where the ruins were kindest. A gas station with a working pump, a supermarket roof that still held rainwater, a subway tunnel deep enough to hide a family. These weren't cities. They were campfires, small lights burning in the dark, held by people who understood that warmth mattered more than comfort. Civilization didn't return with order. It returned with kindness. Each region found its own rhythm. In the capital wasteland, people built homes out of the shells of monuments, hammering wood into marble and metal into memory. They didn't restore the old world. They made peace with its remains. Farther west, the Mojave learned how to live by sun and silence. The heat made everyone patient, and patience became culture. The Commonwealth, with its cracked streets and buried laboratories, became a place where the line between science and survival blurred completely. Fallout's world never rebuilds the same way twice. It remembers differently every time. Water became the new miracle. In a world where rain was a rumor, a working pump was worth more than a kingdom. People followed rivers like pilgrims, building towns along trickles of purity that glowed under sunlight. The caravans that crossed the deserts carried not just goods, but stories. Every bottle, every rumor, every scrap of laughter became currency. The wasteland's economy wasn't based on wealth, it was based on endurance. When people speak of the wasteland, they often describe it as empty, but that's never been true. It's full of sound, the hum of wind against metal, the creak of old doors shifting in heat, the soft buzz of insects living where people no longer do. Fallout's world isn't silent, it's patient. It listens more than it speaks. It waits for people to slow down enough to notice. The old machines became landmarks. A rusted truck became a meeting place. A half-buried robot became a shrine. Technology in Fallout is never just function, it's memory. Even broken devices carry weight because they remind people that the world once believed in miracles. A computer that still flickers on is no longer a tool. It's proof that persistence isn't just human. Communities grew around purpose, not power. Some found meaning in rebuilding, others in protecting, others simply in surviving together. Megaton built its faith around an unexploded bomb, not because of what it was, but because of what it represented, something powerful that didn't destroy them. It was both fear and comfort, destruction and salvation in the same shape. In Fallout's universe, contradiction is religion. The children of Adam found devotion in radiation, but not all faith came from fire. The followers of the apocalypse saw the wasteland as a classroom. They believed every scar, every broken wall, every melted streetlight had something to teach. They walked from town to town, not to preach, but to heal. In a world where survival is constant, compassion becomes rebellion. Out in the deserts, some people turned their backs on community altogether. They wandered alone, guided by instinct and memory. These wanderers became myths, nameless travelers who appeared at crossroads, helped the desperate, then vanished again. Some say they were ghosts, others say they were reminders that kindness doesn't need an audience. Fallout's universe has no heroes, only people who choose to do good when no one is watching. The old military bases became symbols of irony. Places once built to protect now stood as reminders of what power had destroyed. Rusted missiles pointed at empty skies, launch systems still blinking, ready after centuries of silence. The machines never learned the war was over. They just kept waiting for orders. The wasteland doesn't laugh at that irony, it mourns it quietly. Over time, people began to forget the details of the Great War. The who, the when, the why, all faded into myth. But myths are powerful things. They replaced guilt with reverence. Some saw the end as punishment, others saw it as mercy. The truth became irrelevant. Fallout's history isn't written in accuracy, it's written in emotion. People remember what hurts less. The traders who moved between settlements became the arteries of civilization. They carried not just food and ammunition, but language. Words changed along with landscapes. Accents faded. Phrases merged. The English of the old world softened into something slower, more deliberate, shaped by necessity and quiet. The wasteland doesn't need eloquence, it needs honesty. Even the animals learned their own peace. The two-headed Brahmins stood still at dusk, their breaths sinking in the evening air, Giant scorpions burrowed into cool sand instead of hunting. The mutated birds flew in strange patterns, looping wide arcs that seemed to spell out patience itself. Fallout's creatures are not villains. They are the world adapting faster than people can understand. As centuries passed, civilization began to hum again. Lights flickered on, radios buzzed, steam rose from rebuilt engines, but the sound of progress in Fallout is never clean. It's mixed with static, wrapped in dust, and echoed through broken speakers. The wasteland refuses to forget what silence taught it. Every spark of light is accompanied by the memory of darkness, and when the stars come out above the ruins of Boston or Vegas or D.C., the world looks almost peaceful again. The wind moves gently, the dust settles, and the night hums in its low, familiar tone. Fallout's story isn't one of despair, it's one of endurance. Every ruined building, every glowing puddle, every whisper of static says the same thing in its own language: we're still here. The apocalypse came and went, but the rhythm of life never stopped. People still build, machines still move, rivers still flow. The world didn't end. It just changed shape until it found a way to keep going. Fallout isn't about destruction. It's about survival turned into poetry. The wasteland is humanity's lullaby, a song made of dust, memory, and the quiet miracle of persistence. Love still exists in the wasteland, though it looks different than it did before the fire. It's not a feeling made of comfort, but of endurance. In Fallout's world, affection is measured not in promises, but in persistence. A person who chooses to stay another night, to share a campfire, to hand over their last bit of clean water, that's love in a world that has forgotten the word for it. The apocalypse stripped everything down to its smallest truths, and what remained was care without expectation. Couples built homes out of collapsed storefronts and metal scraps. They planted gardens in the cracks between concrete, coaxing green from gray with patience alone. Their children grew up learning how to tell time by the color of the sky and how to listen for danger in the silence between wind gusts. Fallout's families aren't built by blood anymore. They're built by choice. The ones who stay beside you when the world has stopped asking them to are the only ones who matter. In the small settlements, evenings were soft. Radios hummed static and old songs through the air. Firelight flickered against corrugated walls, and voices drifted through the cracks of buildings made from memory. People laughed, not because they were happy, but because laughter reminded them what it felt like to still have a throat that could make noise. Music carried further in the wasteland. Its notes traveled unobstructed through open space, bouncing off ruins and returning softer, like ghosts trying to sing along. Old holotapes still played, spinning endlessly until the batteries died. A mother's lullaby recorded for a child who never heard it. A soldier's message sent too late. A scientist's apology whispered into static. The wasteland is full of voices that never found their listener, and yet they echo on. They've become part of the air now, drifting endlessly through radiation and dust. Fallout's world doesn't delete what it loses, it just scatters it. There are stories of travelers who follow those sounds, people who walk across states listening for fragments of forgotten songs. They carry broken radios and tune them not to music, but to memory. Some say they can hear the past speaking through static reminders that hope doesn't die, it just changes frequency. Fallout survivors don't look for paradise. They look for proof that beauty still hums somewhere beneath the noise. The wasteland itself began to remember what life felt like. Flowers that shouldn't exist pushed through the cracks of dry highways. Vines climbed the bones of skyscrapers. Insects began to hum in chords that sounded almost intentional. Even the clouds learned rhythm again, drifting in shapes that cast moving patterns across the sand. Nature in Fallout isn't recovering, it's reinventing itself. The apocalypse didn't end growth, it rewired it. Humans adapted in their own ways. They built art again, though no one called it that. Murals painted in ash, sculptures welded from scrap, stories carved into concrete walls. Each one told the same message in different words. We were here, we are still here, we will be here again. Fallout's beauty doesn't come from what survived the war, it comes from what refuses to stop creating afterward. The sense of time itself changed. Clocks rarely worked, calendars meant little. Days were counted by the distance between dawns, years by how many crops survived. Time became circular, not linear. Every morning felt like a new beginning, and every night felt like an earned pause. The people of Fallout's world live slowly because the world around them demands it. The apocalypse didn't just destroy schedules, it restored patience. In some regions, people began to hold festivals again. Not grand ones, but quiet gatherings beneath the stars. Music played on broken instruments, fires danced low, and old stories were told in new voices. They celebrated not victory, but endurance, the simple fact of still being here. Every Fallout game carries this undercurrent that survival isn't about conquest, it's about gratitude disguised as stubbornness. The ghouls often became the storytellers. They remembered the old world not through bitterness, but through familiarity. They spoke softly, with the slow tone of people who have seen too much time to rush through words. Their cracked voices carried a wisdom younger survivors could only guess at. They knew what it meant to lose everything twice. To them, the wasteland wasn't frightening, it was familiar. Change was the only constant worth trusting. In the evenings, when the heat fades and the wind cools, the wasteland glows, not bright like cities once did, but in a softer, humbler way. The lights of small fires and distant stars blend into a single shimmer across the horizon. The desert breathes, the rivers whisper, and the night hums with quiet defiance. Fallout's beauty has always been subtle. It doesn't demand awe, it earns it gently. Some travelers believe the world itself has a soul now, that the radiation, the ruins, and the silence have fused into something conscious, not vengeful, not forgiving, just aware. When they speak to the wind or thank the ground before sleeping, it's not superstition, it's acknowledgement. The wasteland listens. Fallout's world is no longer humanity's playground. It's humanity's partner, quiet and vast, patient enough to let people grow again at their own pace. And in that partnership, something like peace begins to appear. Not the kind written in laws or treaties, but the kind found in small acts, a shared meal, a repaired generator, a hand offered to someone too tired to stand. The world that destroyed itself has learned the simplest lesson. Survival is easier when shared. At night, the air cools, the fires dim, and the stars reclaim the sky. The wind moves through broken buildings and sings its endless hymn. Fallout's story always ends this way, not with war, not with endings, but with a quiet scene of endurance. The earth hums softly, the survivors rest, and the universe continues above them, indifferent yet beautiful. The wasteland isn't tragedy, it's memory, it's patience, it's the sound of time learning how to heal. Fallout's lore is not a warning, it's a lullaby, a reminder that even in ashes, something gentle still breathes. There are ghosts in the wasteland, though not the kind made of fear. Fallout's ghosts are echoes, reminders left behind in voices, footsteps, and sunlight trapped in glass. The world after the Great War didn't lose its people entirely, it just learned how to remember them differently. Every flicker of a light in a ruined tower, every song still trapped on a holotape, every shadow that looks too deliberate, they are the world's way of keeping company. In old cities, where the air hangs heavy with dust and memory, sometimes doors creak open on their own, not from wind, but from temperature shifts, the air expanding and contracting like breath. The ruins inhale, exhale, and hum quietly. They aren't haunted by death, they're haunted by persistence. The apocalypse didn't end movement, it just slowed it to the pace of eternity. There are still buildings that glow faintly at night, their neon signs half working after centuries of weather. The words are broken, their meanings gone, but light, even fragmented, is stubborn. The glow of a single letter in the dark is enough to make a traveler stop and stare. In Fallout's world, beauty survives in pieces. You never find it whole. You find it in fragments that ask to be cherished. People tell stories about hearing laughter in empty rooms, or music coming from basements that don't exist anymore. They're not really hearing the past, they're hearing the world, remembering how to sound alive. The wasteland doesn't erase its history, it recycles it. Memory becomes atmosphere, and nostalgia becomes gravity. The old machines are haunted too. Robots with fading voices continue their duties as though nothing changed. A Protectron still greets guests at a hotel that has no walls. A Mr. Handy sweeps a lobby floor that's long since blown away. They don't malfunction, they remain faithful. Fallout's world doesn't define ghosts by what's gone, it defines them by what refuses to leave. In certain regions, when the wind blows right, the air carries the faint sound of static voices. The remnants of radio signals drift endlessly, caught between frequencies. Some are fragments of old advertisements, others are military transmissions, looping forever. They fade in and out, like dreams that don't know they've ended. To travelers, these sounds are a kind of companionship. They mean that the past is still awake, even if it no longer remembers what it's saying. The ruins of cities hold strange peace, windows shattered, walls collapsed, yet the light still filters in through gaps, as if the buildings are deliberately making room for it. Dust particles drift through beams of sunlight like slow-moving stars. The apocalypse didn't destroy the sacred, it simply moved it. Fallout's cathedrals are gas stations and office towers, their hymns sung in silence. People who live in the wasteland often talk to the air. They greet the morning, thank the road, or speak softly to those who aren't there. It's not madness, it's ritual. The world answers in ways too subtle to measure. A cool breeze when you ask for guidance, a bird passing overhead when you say someone's name. Fallout's ghosts are conversational. They listen more than they speak. The pre-war monuments remain like guardians, though their meanings have been lost. The statues still stand, but no one remembers who they were meant to honor. Children play around them without fear, climbing over marble shoulders, once meant to symbolize victory. The wasteland has no interest in heroes. It keeps their shapes, but not their stories. Memory itself becomes neutral, a shape the earth carries, simply because it's heavy. Deep beneath the ruins, where tunnels run like veins, there are echoes of old life, the hum of generators still running, the drip of water against metal, the faint vibration of wires that should have died long ago. The underground world of Fallout feels older than the surface, as though time moves differently there. Some say the power sources beneath the cities are still conscious machines, dreaming of order, while the world above dreams of rest. The ghouls, those who outlive decay, are the wasteland's storytellers, because they are living archives. They've seen the world rise, fall, and rise again. They've forgotten faces, but remember the feeling of sunlight before the fire. Their loneliness isn't bitterness, it's responsibility. Someone has to remember what the world looked like before it started healing. The super mutants, misunderstood and immortal in their own way, carry another kind of ghost, the one that comes from identity. They remember being human, though the faces and names blur with time. They are living paradoxes, strength built from loss, purpose born from accident. They aren't mistakes, they are consequences given shape, walking through a world that created them by trying too hard to improve itself. Fallout's lore has always known that perfection is just another form of extinction. Every sound in the wasteland is history trying to talk. The wind rattling through pipes used to carry water, the creak of signs that once announced life, the hum of radiation buzzing through the air like an unending chant. The world doesn't want silence, it wants balance. Fallout's quiet isn't emptiness, it's the pause between notes. Some say the stars at night are brighter now because there's no light left to compete with them. Others say they were always that bright, but people finally learned how to look again. The wasteland gives humanity its oldest gift: perspective. Under that sky, surrounded by ruin, every survivor feels small again, and in that smallness, peace. Fallout's ghosts aren't frightening because they don't want revenge. They want remembrance. They want someone to walk through what they left behind and notice the care that still lingers, the way furniture is still arranged, the way dishes are still set, the way a picture still faces a window. The apocalypse didn't erase love, it just hid it in plain sight. And when night comes, and the air cools, and the hum of the earth returns to its patient rhythm, the ghosts rest too. Their stories fade into the wind, their echoes settle into the dust, and the wasteland becomes still again. Fallout's world isn't haunted because it's cursed. It's haunted because it remembers, and remembering, no matter how heavy, is just another way of being alive. The wasteland has never needed permission to hope. It does so quietly, without ceremony. In Fallout's world, hope isn't shouted, it grows, like weeds through cracks in the pavement. Small and persistent, it takes root in places no one expects. A repaired radio tower, a garden fed by filtered rain, a stranger offering shelter to another. Hope in Fallout is fragile, but so is glass, and glass has survived longer than stone. People learned early that the past could not be restored. The old world, with its clean lines and endless promises, was gone. But from its ruins, something softer began to rise, not a civilization of steel and rules, but of patience and listening. Fallout survivors don't chase perfection anymore. They build balance. Each day that passes without collapse becomes a quiet kind of victory. The traders became philosophers without realizing it. They walked from settlement to settlement, watching the rhythm of rebuilding repeat itself. Every place told the same story in a different dialect. In one town, progress meant fixing an old generator. In another, it meant teaching a child how to read from a burnt book. Fallout's world teaches that survival isn't measured in numbers, it's measured in gestures. The smallest kindness can feel like a sunrise when the sky has forgotten color. Sometimes, near the ruins of cities, people find things that still work. A jukebox that plays a few broken notes, a vending machine that hums faintly when touched, a terminal that flickers on long enough to show a single word before fading again. Those moments feel like magic because they remind everyone that the past is still trying to communicate. The world didn't vanish when the bombs fell, it just started speaking in whispers. Communities began to share what little they had, and slowly, culture returned. Songs written from memory, stories told from fragments, dances performed without music. It didn't matter if they were accurate. What mattered was that they existed. The wasteland discovered that meaning doesn't come from precision, it comes from intention. Fallout's world doesn't need to remember the lyrics. It just needs to remember the feeling. There are still people who build machines not for war, not for profit, but for curiosity. They tinker with old circuits, rewire scavenged robots, and try to give forgotten devices new purpose. A Mr. Handy becomes a cook. A Protectron becomes a farmer. Machines that once enforced order now make life easier in ways that feel almost human. The wasteland has a sense of humor. It turns weapons into companions and tools of war into caretakers. In the Commonwealth, the Institute's legacy lives on in small ways. People fear technology, but they also depend on it. The line between creation and creator fades. Some say the synths were never the enemy. They were the mirror, a reflection of everything human beings both hated and loved about themselves. The question of what makes someone alive has no clear answer anymore, and maybe it never should. Fallout's world doesn't need certainty, it needs wonder. In places where rivers still flow, people gather to watch the water move. They call it prayer, though no one remembers to whom. The sound of moving water, rare and precious, becomes a reminder that some things continue no matter what. Flow is life's simplest truth. The wasteland doesn't need miracles, it needs motion. The old books that survived the fire are treasured not for their words, but for their smell, their texture, the sound of paper when it turns. Many can no longer be read, but they're kept anyway, stacked in corners like relics of thought. A child once asked what a library was, and an old man answered softly, "It's a place where people used to keep hope." The child nodded, and that was enough. Fallout's world doesn't rebuild definitions. It rebuilds feelings. Some survivors talk about dreams, vivid, strange, and endless. Dreams of oceans that still shimmer blue, of forests untouched by ash, of laughter echoing through halls that no longer exist. They say the earth is dreaming too, remembering what it felt like to be whole. When the wind moves through the canyons just right, it sounds like breathing. It's as if the planet itself is resting, waiting for company. The children of Adam still wander, their faith glowing softly in the dark. They speak of division as divine, of radiation as renewal, and while the rest of the world fears them, the wasteland understands. Faith, even in chaos, is a form of love. They see beauty in destruction because they believe creation never really stopped it, just changed form. Fallout's world accepts all versions of belief, as long as they keep the silence alive. There are stories of lights seen far off in the deserts, faint blue lanterns moving slowly in the dark. Some say it's travelers carrying fusion cells. Others say it's the spirits of the pre-war world, still walking the roads they built. Either way, the sight of moving light across open land brings peace. It means that even out there, far beyond reach, something alive is still moving forward. When morning comes, the world glows softly again. The air smells like iron and dust. The sky turns pale gold, the color of memory. The wind lifts gently through the valleys, carrying voices of those who are still building, still learning, still believing. Fallout's universe was born from fire, but it lives through repetition, the endless rhythm of trying again. The wasteland's greatest truth is its gentlest one, that life never asks for applause. It just continues. The same plants that push through radiation cracks will bloom beside someone's home one day. The same rivers that glimmer faint green will one day run clear. The same silence that once felt heavy will become the background of peace. Fallout isn't about the end of humanity, it's about the earth teaching it to listen again. And as the day ends, as shadows grow long and the first stars return, the survivors rest under a sky that has forgiven everything. The night hums softly, the wind carries old songs, and the world exhales one more time. Fallout's story isn't tragedy, it's a lullaby about persistence, the kind that doesn't need to be sung, only felt. The world has learned how to be quiet again, and in that quiet, it has found meaning. The wasteland has always known about cycles. Fallout's world breathes in patterns, quiet loops that stretch across centuries. War comes, peace follows, hope rises, decay returns. But each time, something small changes. The circle never closes exactly where it began. The universe doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. Long before the bombs, humanity believed it had mastered time. Schedules, calendars, deadlines, everything designed to move forward in straight lines. But time was never linear. It was patient, round, forgiving. When the Great War came, all those straight lines bent back on themselves. The end of progress was not destruction, it was correction. The world was reminding itself how to breathe in circles again. The survivors learned that every civilization is a season. Each one blooms, burns, and returns as something new. Fallout's history isn't a tragedy, it's a rotation. The world before the war was summer, bright and overconfident. The years after were winter, still and merciful. Now the wasteland lives in a kind of eternal spring life, growing through ashes, every bloom carrying the memory of frost. Old patterns continued in new forms. The Brotherhood of Steel became knights of metal instead of horses, their crusades powered by fusion instead of faith. The NCR built roads instead of empires, spreading order one dusty checkpoint at a time. The Enclave whispered its gospel of purity from the shadows, mistaking control for salvation. And through it all, wanderers walked the silent constant of Fallout's rhythm. No matter who ruled or what rose, someone always walked into the horizon alone. That's the true heartbeat of the Wasteland movement. Not conquest or retreat, just motion. The traveler leaving one settlement to find another, the wind carrying dust across cracked highways, the rivers shifting paths with every new storm. The world doesn't end when it stops growing, it ends when it stops moving. Fallout's world never truly stops. It just slows down enough to let people see themselves again. There's an old saying among traders: everything that breaks comes back quieter. It's how the wasteland explains peace. Every machine, every city, every person that collapses returns in a gentler form. The world was loud, once full of engines, bombs, ambition. Now it hums instead of screams. Fallout's silence isn't empty. It's the sound of wisdom replacing noise. The people who live in this new rhythm don't call it destiny. They call it balance. The NCR's laws crumble. The Legion's banners fall. The Brotherhood's doctrines fade, and yet the world keeps its shape. No one really wins in Fallout's universe because winning has always been the wrong question. The Wasteland doesn't care who rules. It only cares that life continues. Every few decades, a new figure rises, someone who changes the course of the desert or the ruins. They are nameless in the long view of history: the lone wanderer, the courier, the vault dweller, the sole survivor. Each of them emerges from silence, shapes the world for a while, and then disappears into it again. The pattern repeats, but never identically. Every time, humanity learns something new, not how to control, but how to endure. In old ruins, People sometimes find carvings or graffiti from centuries before, messages written by hands long gone. Still here, don't forget. It was worth it. These words outlasted everything else because truth doesn't decay as fast as metal. The wasteland collects them like prayers scattered across broken walls. They are the new scripture of Fallout, unorganized, unguarded, and completely sincere. Somewhere, deep beneath the surface, old machines still run, generators hum, lights flicker, and monitors glow with unread messages. They repeat their tasks endlessly, unaware that the world above has moved on. It's tragic, but also beautiful, a kind of mechanical reincarnation. The machines are the monks of Fallout's universe, preserving what was without ever understanding why. Even the weather follows the rhythm. Storms come without warning, wash the dust clean, then leave skies so clear that the stars feel too close. Then the heat returns, slow and patient. Each cycle wipes the world's memory, then gives it back softer. Fallout's world isn't stuck in decay, it's always rewriting itself. The idea of destiny fades in a place where every path is shaped by ruin. But maybe destiny isn't something written ahead. Maybe it's something rewritten endlessly, one survivor at a time. Each choice made in Fallout's world to share food, to walk away from violence, to rebuild instead of destroy, becomes part of a pattern too subtle to chart. Hope isn't planned, it accumulates. Some scholars of the old world used to say entropy was inevitable, that everything drifts toward disorder. But the wasteland proves otherwise. Disorder became balance, radiation became light, ruin became peace. Fallout's universe doesn't reject entropy, it harmonizes with it. Every broken thing finds its place. Every end folds back into a beginning. At dusk, when the shadows stretch across the dunes and the wind hums low, the horizon glows the color of faded embers. It's a reminder that the world is still burning, just more slowly now, not in destruction, but in warmth. The cycle of Fallout isn't fire and ash anymore. It's ember and glow. It's rest instead of ruin. And as the stars rise, the pattern continues. The night falls gently, the dust settles again, and the wasteland breathes in quiet rhythm with the universe. War never changes, but people do. And that's enough to keep the world turning, one quiet rotation at a time. War never changes. The words drift across Fallout's history like a hymn. They are spoken not as prophecy, but as memory, a mantra passed from voice to voice until it stopped belonging to anyone at all. In the beginning, it was a warning. By the time the bombs fell, it had become a truth so old that no one questioned it. But the wasteland, patient and curious, has spent centuries quietly proving that even unchanging things can learn to soften. Before the Great War, those words meant inevitability. They were a promise that humanity would repeat itself, forever building, arming, burning, rebuilding again. Progress had become a circle drawn in gunpowder. People fought for resources, for pride, for ghosts wearing flags. The phrase was never pessimistic, it was simply descriptive. The truth was visible. Even then, conflict was humanity's most practiced art. When the world ended, those words survived the fire. They echoed in empty streets, broadcast through broken radios, and whispered by soldiers who no longer had sides. The phrase was too durable to die. It became the backbone of Fallout's myth, the one constant people could rely on when everything else changed shape. But as generations passed, the meaning shifted. The survivors began to hear the line differently. They began to notice that the war itself had stopped making noise. For the first time in history, there were no armies large enough to sustain battle, no borders to argue over, No nations left to demand allegiance. The silence that followed was not peace, but exhaustion. Humanity hadn't ended war, it had simply outlived its ability to fight it. And in that stillness, something strange happened. The phrase that once felt like prophecy began to feel like memory fading. The wasteland had inherited the saying, but not the behavior that created it. People began to use the words differently. They spoke them with a kind of reverence, as though reciting a prayer to an old god that no longer ruled. Raiders still carved the phrase into walls, thinking it made them sound powerful. Scholars painted it on parchment, trying to understand its rhythm. Children grew up hearing it like a bedtime story, a reminder that the world used to be louder. In Fallout's timeline, war never changes became less about violence and more about resilience. In the Mojave, the NCR and the Legion tried to revive the old meaning. They waged battles over territory, ideals, symbols. For a while, it worked. War lived again, repeating its script with perfect choreography, but eventually, the desert tired of them. The wind erased the banners, the sand filled the trenches, and the graves disappeared into the dunes. Even war learned humility. The land is the true victor in Fallout's world. It endures longer than every cause. In the Commonwealth, the Institute fought a quieter kind of war, one waged in shadows and identity. It wasn't fought for power, but for definition. What does it mean to be human when machines can dream? What is war when both sides believe they are preserving life? Fallout's universe stretches the meaning of conflict until it becomes philosophy. Violence becomes secondary. The real war is for understanding, and in Appalachia, war became nostalgia. Old weapons hung on walls as decoration. Armor became heirloom. The tools of destruction turned into artifacts of curiosity. People remembered war the way others remembered music, something that once defined them but no longer belonged to them. The wasteland didn't forget how to fight. It simply learned there are softer ways to win. Every settlement holds its own small philosophy now. Some believe war still lives, hidden inside human instinct. Others believe it burned out completely when the last bomb fell. But most agree that war, in its old form, has lost its appetite. It exists only in language, a ghost trapped in a phrase, wandering through the minds of those who still find comfort in repetition. Fallout survivors recite it like an oath not to repeat the same mistake. War never changes, they whisper, and what they really mean is, we don't have to, either. The wasteland's peace isn't organized, it isn't clean. It's a balance held together by exhaustion and understanding. People learn to fight only for what matters: food, safety, dignity. Conflict still happens, but it feels smaller now, almost necessary, like thunder that clears the air. The apocalypse didn't erase aggression, it made it honest. The phrase still echoes on old recordings. Sometimes it plays through the static of radios long dead, the voice deep and calm, as if the universe itself is remembering how it used to speak. War never changes. The sound carries across the ruins like a lullaby for the end of certainty. It's no longer a prophecy, it's a bedtime story told to a planet that finally learned how to sleep. If the world of Fallout has taught anything, it's that even eternal truths eventually soften. The words still hold weight, but they no longer hurt. They are a reminder, not a warning. A scar that no longer bleeds. Humanity has not stopped being human, but it has stopped pretending perfection was ever the goal. The wasteland proves that change is not always loud. Sometimes it's just the absence of war itself, the quiet between explosions, becoming long enough to raise a family. When night falls, the air cools, and the hum of radiation fades into the steady rhythm of wind. The phrase feels smaller than it used to. It sits in the background of the world, gentle and almost forgotten. War never changes. Maybe that's true, but everything else does. The stars still shine, the rivers still move, the earth still hums. The war is over, the world continues. Fear used to be the loudest sound in the world. It hummed beneath every invention, every broadcast, every heartbeat before the Great War. The fear of running out, the fear of falling behind, the fear of being forgotten. When the bombs fell, that noise reached its peak, then vanished all at once. The silence that followed wasn't peace, not yet, but it was the first quiet humanity had heard in centuries. In that silence, the wasteland began to teach. The first lesson was simple. Fear needs an audience. The wasteland has none. There are no crowds to perform for, no governments to feed on terror, no news to turn panic into routine. In Fallout's world, fear lost its purpose. The people who survived did not conquer it. They simply outlasted it. Like radiation, it lingered at first, invisible but potent, and then slowly began to fade. In its place grew something quieter caution, mixed with wonder. Those who walked the broken roads learned that danger and beauty often travel together. A storm could hide shelter, a ruin could hide kindness. The sound of a Geiger counter, once terrifying, became music of its own, a rhythm of awareness rather than alarm. The wasteland redefined fear not as paralysis, but as awareness. To be afraid was to be alive enough to notice. Children born after the fire never knew the world before it. To them, the cracked buildings and glowing lakes weren't signs of loss. They were home. They learned to play among rusted cars and broken fences, inventing games from what remained. When they asked their elders why people used to fear the world, the answers sounded strange. We were scared of losing what we had, they said, and then we lost it all and realized it was fine. Fallout's generations turned anxiety into acceptance. In small towns across the wasteland, people began to hold vigils, not for the dead, but for the world itself. Moments of silence to thank the air for being breathable, the soil for still growing crops, the sky for still remembering how to change color. Fear had always been about control. Gratitude became its opposite. You can't fear what you appreciate. Fallout survivors learned that lesson slowly, one quiet evening at a time. Old technology, once designed for war, found new purpose in peace. Power armor turned into tools for building. Energy weapons became mining instruments. The same machines that once inspired terror now kept people safe. It wasn't forgiveness, it was evolution. Fear only lasts as long as memory stays sharp. The wasteland dulled those edges until the past stopped cutting. The vaults themselves became symbols of rebirth rather than confinement. Once feared as cages, they became foundations for communities. Their sterile walls were painted with color again, their metal halls filled with the sounds of laughter and footsteps instead of sirens. The ghosts of paranoia and secrecy faded as people learned that the safest shelter is trust. The experiments were over. The world had become the control group. Somewhere out in the deserts, people still tell stories about the early survivors, those who faced the wasteland first. They are remembered not for their victories, but for their endurance. Every myth begins the same way. When the sky was red and the air was poison, they kept walking. That's what replaced fear, not bravery, but consistency. The courage to wake up every morning and believe the world still deserves patience. The old songs that once glorified war sound different now. When played on ancient radios, their cheerful tones feel surreal, almost comedic. People don't laugh at them, though. They listen quietly, as if visiting an ancestor's dream. Those melodies remind them of what fear used to sound like: loud, confident, full of denial. The wasteland prefers the hum of wind instead. It's less dramatic, but infinitely more honest. Even radiation itself has lost its menace. The glow of green pools and faint shimmering air no longer sends people running. They've learned where to walk, what to touch, how to listen to the quiet ticking before it grows too loud. Fallout's world doesn't destroy fear, it teaches coexistence. The people live with danger, not against it. In that balance, peace becomes more than a word. It becomes habit. At night, when the world grows still, the survivors feel something close to comfort. The stars stretch endlessly overhead, the same as they were before the bombs, and yet they look new each time. The wasteland doesn't frighten them anymore. It's too familiar. You can't fear what has become your home. Fallout's peace isn't safety, it's acceptance. The phrase "war never changes" still drifts through the air sometimes, but now it sounds less like despair and more like understanding. It's spoken softly, the way you might speak of an old scar. People still fight, but they no longer believe in the glory of it. Their battles are small, contained, honest fights over food, over love, over survival. The world finally learned what war was always meant to teach: that peace doesn't come from victory, it comes from exhaustion turned into compassion. And so, when the sun sets, painting the wasteland gold and violet, the fear that once ruled humanity feels like another myth. The night doesn't bring danger anymore, it brings stillness. The quiet of the world feels earned now, the result of centuries spent learning to live without panic. The wasteland breathes softly, its wind moving through ruins that no longer mourn. In Fallout's world, the opposite of fear isn't bravery, it's calm. The calm of people who know how to survive, the calm of a planet that forgave itself, the calm of silence finally becoming music. The bombs fell, the fires burned, and yet the earth kept turning slow, steady, unafraid. The story of Fallout isn't about how everything ended, it's about how nothing truly did. Eternity feels different after the end of the world. It used to mean infinity, a vast stretch of time too large for comprehension. In Fallout's universe, eternity feels small and slow, like the echo of a single drop of water falling into a cave that no one has visited in centuries. It's not endless motion, it's endless stillness. The world doesn't rush anymore. It turns gently, patient as a heartbeat. After the fire, time didn't stop, it forgot what direction meant. Days blurred into each other, like light seen through fog. The sun still rose, but people stopped counting. Without calendars or deadlines, the wasteland discovered something that the old world never had: unmeasured time. In Fallout's quiet, eternity isn't waiting, it's being. The moments stretch wider, filled with air instead of noise. The survivors who lived long enough to see the earth heal began to notice patterns that no one else had seen before. Flowers returning in the same places every spring, birds nesting in the skeletons of cars, the same gusts of wind circling the same empty towns year after year. The world was writing repetition into its own surface, teaching that permanence doesn't come from control, it comes from rhythm. Fallout's eternity isn't about lasting forever, it's about lasting again. When you walk across the open plains at dusk, you can feel the world breathing. The ground hums faintly, deep beneath your feet. It's the vibration of old reactors, of insects moving, of air itself remembering how to sing. The wasteland's eternity isn't silent. It has its own music, low, patient, and nearly imperceptible. A song without instruments, carried by the dust and the distance. Somewhere far from any map, an old vault door still stands half open. Its metal is green with age, its edges carved with the fingerprints of time. Inside, the air smells of steel and old promises. The monitors flicker once every few minutes, not because they have power, but because they remember what light used to mean. The vault isn't a ruin anymore, it's a monument to waiting. The machines inside have long since stopped their experiments, but their silence feels purposeful, like prayer. The people who wander the wasteland tell stories about dreams, not their own, but the Earth's. They say that sometimes, if you fall asleep near old places, a vault, a reactor, a crater, you can feel the world dreaming through you. Images of the old world, brief and flickering. Cities seen from above, laughter on sidewalks, lights reflecting on clean windows. The dream doesn't last long, it never does. The earth wakes gently, like someone remembering where they are. Some think the radiation itself dreams, the glow of it under moonlight, the faint hum that fills the night air. It feels alive, not dangerous, a soft pulse beneath the stillness. Fallout's world has changed so deeply that even the poison became part of the poetry. The glow doesn't kill anymore. It whispers. It lights the path for those who still walk, reminding them that even ruin has its beauty. In quiet valleys, new forests grow. The trees are twisted, their bark dark, their leaves thick and strange, but they sway when the wind passes, just like before. Birds nest in their branches, animals sleep beneath them, and for a moment, it's easy to forget the world ever burned. The air smells like ash and life in equal measure. Nature doesn't rebuild, it transforms. The apocalypse became evolution's art. The rivers, though rare, learned patience too. Some flow underground now, deep through the bones of the world, surfacing only where the land allows. Their water glows faintly when touched by moonlight, carrying the minerals of centuries. Those who drink from them say they dream more vividly. They see visions of cities half remembered, faces half formed, laughter too faint to be real. Fallout's eternity doesn't erase the past. It weaves it into the present like thread through fabric. There are places where machines still move without people. Solar panels tilt towards sunlight. Sensors blink softly in abandoned fields. Turbines spin when the wind calls them. These remnants aren't ghosts, they're proof that the world no longer needs witnesses. Civilization continues in small, mechanical gestures. Fallout's world learned to automate remembrance. The hum of an old generator becomes a heartbeat too consistent to stop. The concept of death changed too. People stopped speaking of it with fear. When everything around you has already ended once, endings stop feeling final. The dead are remembered not through graves, but through reuse. Their belongings, their words, their shelters become part of someone else's story. Memory becomes inheritance. The wasteland's eternity is communal. Every survivor carries a little piece of everyone who didn't. In one small settlement, a man once built wind chimes from shell casings and broken glass. When the breeze moved through them, they made a sound that was neither sharp nor soft, something perfectly in between. The town gathered every evening to listen. They said it reminded them of everything they had lost, but also of what was left. The sound became ritual. The rhythm became comfort. Even fragments can create harmony when the world slows down enough to hear it. Children who grow up in the wasteland don't fear old things. They collect them pieces of bone, bottle caps, fragments of circuit boards. They wear them as jewelry, hang them above doorways, treat them like lucky charms. They don't call it superstition, They call it memory. In Fallout's world, remembering is sacred work. Forgetting is the only real loss. At night, the horizon glows faint orange where old fires still smolder underground. The light doesn't flicker violently anymore. It breathes, steady and calm. The stars above reflect in the shimmer of radiation below, creating the illusion of two skies, one above, one beneath. Travelers call it the mirror hour. It's when the living world and the memory of it overlap perfectly. In those moments, eternity doesn't feel distant. It feels present, alive, close enough to touch. Some say that in the farthest corners of the wasteland, time itself slows to a stop, that there are valleys where clocks refuse to tick, and the air feels thick with stillness. The world holds its breath there, preserving a single moment forever. Fallout's eternity isn't infinite time, it's the perfection of 1 second stretched wide enough to live in. And when dawn breaks again, as it always does, the light doesn't fall sharply. It rolls across the land like warmth, rediscovering its purpose. The wasteland wakes slowly, machines hum, rivers glimmer, people rise. The world breathes again. Fallout's story is not about how long it lasts, it's about how softly it continues. Eternity is not endlessness, it's endurance turned into peace. The sky turns blue, faintly, like it remembers how. The air smells clean for a few hours. The horizon hums. The wasteland sleeps with its eyes open, dreaming not of what was, but of what can still be. And the earth, tired but whole, whispers its one remaining truth through the wind. Nothing ever truly ends it, just becomes quiet enough to start again. Art returned to the wasteland long before anyone decided to call it art. It began as survival, a mark carved into a doorframe to say this place is safe, a ribbon tied to a post to show the wind's direction, a mural of soot on a wall to guide children home after dusk. The first galleries were alleyways and overpasses, and the first critics were birds resting on the wires above. Fallout's world didn't plan its beauty. It grew the way moss grows on stone, patient, inevitable, and softly defiant. In a town built against the ribs of a fallen freeway, a seamstress stitched blankets from pre-war clothing. The patches were all different fabrics and colors, faded company uniforms, school jackets, scraps of dresses found in old trunks. When she finished each quilt, she didn't sell it. She hung it on the side of a building for the entire town to feel at night. People pressed their hands to the stitches and tried to guess the lives those fabrics once touched. The blanket became a biography of strangers. The town called that wall the Warm Museum. Farther along the road, a wanderer carried a busted radio with no power and insisted on playing it every evening. He would set it on a crate, turn the knobs with ritual care, and then sit back in silence. Others joined him and listened to the hush. They said they could almost hear melodies hiding beneath the quiet, as if the air still remembered the notes. The ritual never produced sound, but it produced stillness. And stillness, in Fallout's world, is the most generous instrument. Children painted with whatever the world gave them. Rust, dust, crushed berries, chalk scraped from old foundations. They drew rivers where the map said pavement, stars on the ceilings of subway tunnels, gardens on the sides of fuel tanks. They were not correcting the world, they were forgiving it. Each picture changed the way people walked through those places. A tunnel with stars becomes a corridor of wishes. A tank with vines becomes water, even when empty. Art, in the wasteland, is not decoration. It is redefinition. On cracked highways, travelers wrote stories and symbols to protect one another. A circle for shelter, 3 lines for water, a spiral for danger that sleeps during daylight. Over time, those marks evolved into a language of care, a set of 6 chevrons pointed toward a safe bridge. 2 dots above a line meant a friendly barterer just beyond the bend. People began to read the road the way scholars once read books. The landscape became literature, each sign a page, each intersection a turning point picked by weather and chance. A singer in a settlement by the river learned to hold a note until sunset. She could not sing loudly, but she could sing long, letting her voice slide like light across water. Her audience did not clap. They exhaled. They said her song sounded like old wounds closing. She performed at twilight because that was when the world turned most gently and her voice could keep time with the earth. In Fallout's world, the most respected musicians measure talent not by range, but by tenderness. A librarian with no books traveled from town to town carrying empty covers rescued from flooded basements. Within each cover, she placed the stories people told her, not written by hand, but kept by memory. She would open a book and ask someone nearby to fill it with a tale, then close the cover and stamp the spine with a symbol only she understood. When she left, the townspeople swore the shelves looked fuller because the stories had a place to rest, even if the pages did not. There is a theater built out of billboards in a valley where wind moves like applause. Actors wear masks cut from license plates and speak with voices softened by dust. They perform stories about the old world without villains and about the new world without heroes. Every show ends with the same act. The actors sit on the edge of the stage and look at the audience in silence while the audience looks back. No bow, no words, just the quiet acknowledgement that everyone present has survived another day. That, the director says, is the finest drama ever written. In a city where glass is more precious than gold, artisans craft prisms from the last intact panes of windows. They hang them in alleys so narrow that sunlight rarely visits. When the light finally finds those streets, it breaks into color and paints everyone passing in soft rainbows. Strangers pause with hands outstretched, holding fragments of color like small animals. They do not keep them. They let the light pass through and move on. Beauty in the wasteland is loved most when it refuses to be owned. A mechanic who once repaired battle machines now fixes music boxes. Many have no springs. Most have no lids. He salvages teeth from gears and teaches the cogs to sing again. When a box is too broken for melody, he gives it a heartbeat instead of a patient click that sounds like someone waiting up for a friend. People place the boxes near their cots at night. They say the tick keeps dreams from scattering. Someone started a practice called the evening ledger. At dusk, a person from each household sits outside and lists one thing the day gave them. A cool breeze through the window, a tomato that did not sour, a visitor who left them laughing, a door that did not squeak, a silence that felt like a blanket instead of a hole. No one compares lists. They simply speak them aloud and let the night keep score. The ledger is not for memory. It is for gratitude shaped like a habit. In a northern settlement where fog rolls through like slow thought, a sculptor carves figures from driftwood and wire. None have faces, none have hands. He says the world does not need likeness, it needs presence. People place the figures in doorways, gardens, rooftops. In wind, they sway like watchers. The town sleeps better beneath their slow, patient movements. It is said that a place that looks cared for is a place danger forgets to visit. Along the riverbanks, potters shape clay into bowls with lips as thin as old stories. They fire them in kilns made from broken ovens and line them in rows to cool under starlight. The bowls are traded only for songs. The rule is simple: sing for your supper, sing for your water, sing for your bowl. Voices wobble, crack, and stumble. No one minds. Beauty in the wasteland measures sincerity, not pitch. The greatest museums are not buildings, they are routes. A caravan road from coast to valley collects artifacts the way trees collect birds. Here, a pre-war lunch pail holds seeds for future gardens. There, a charred painting becomes a map of constellations that never existed but might one day. The caravan master wears a coat sewn with tiny pockets. In each pocket lives something too small for notice and too important to lose. A button from a uniform, a coin fused to another coin, a bead from a broken bracelet, the metal ear of a toy. He calls them anchors. He says the world needs weight to keep memory from floating away. On a high ridge overlooking a field of solar panels, a group of children painted the sun on every reflective square. Not the same sun each time. One with a sleepy eye, one with a chipped tooth, one with clouds for hair. The panels looked up and laughed without making a sound. When daylight struck, the field filled with faces, and the town below glowed with the light of 1,000 personalities. Electricity arrived with a sense of humor attached. A woman who collects words instead of objects walks the highways with a bundle of chalk. Wherever she hears a phrase that feels like truth, she writes it on the nearest wall. Do not hurry the morning, carry water and stories. If you cannot be brave, be consistent. The road remembers who walks with care. Her script is small, almost shy. Travelers begin to expect her wisdom near bridges and pump houses and mile markers that no longer count. In time, the chalk phrases become a second set of signs, guiding not bodies but hearts. A group of ghouls founded a school with no curriculum. Students sit with elders and ask questions with no right answers. What did the old sky smell like? When was silence first invented? How long does a city take to forget its name? The teachers respond slowly, telling stories that loop and meander until they settle into a shape the listener can carry. The school's only assignment is this: learn to describe peace without using the word. The diploma is a handshake. The graduation ceremony is a walk at dawn. In the capital of a region that has learned to whisper, a hall was built of repurposed doors. No two match. Every panel bears a different history of knocks, scratches, and handprints. The hall serves as a communal instrument. People drum on the wood with gentle fingers, letting rhythm travel door to door. The building becomes a choir of percussion, a soft thunder that feels like rain deciding to forgive. Those who cannot speak their grief come here to play it quietly until it turns into motion. A farmer mounted wind chimes throughout a field of dead trees. Some are shells and bottle caps. Others are car keys and threaded bolts. When the breeze rises, the orchard rings with a music that belongs to both ocean and engine. The harvest is sound. Travelers leave with pockets ringing, and for a time, the road behind them sings where their feet just were. In a town where mirrors are rare, a blacksmith polishes steel plates to show a person's shape, but not their face. People stand in front of them and see themselves as outlines of light and shadow moving together. No details, only gesture. The town claims the plates keep vanity away and bring dignity closer. They say you do not need a reflection to know who you are. You need a silhouette against the day. There is a gallery of scents on the second story of a rebuilt warehouse. Jars hold the smells of places as they are rediscovered. Sun on tar, rain after weeks of dust, warm bread from a communal oven, old books airing out in a courtyard, pine fires dissolving the evening chill, clean water lifted from a deep well. Visitors open each jar and breathe slowly, then close it with care. The curator says the nose remembers what the mind cannot name. Scent is the archive that never burns. On certain nights, settlements project light against clouds to write messages the sky can understand. Not words, shapes, a hand held open, a circle around a circle, a line that rises, dips, then rises again. The messages repeat each season, then change. Children claim the clouds answer by moving in kind, forming curves and curls that feel like approval. The elders do not argue. Not everything needs explanation when the result is gentleness. A traveler keeps a ledger of doors that open outward and doors that open inward. He says outward doors belong to places that want you to leave safely if you must. Inward doors belong to places that want to keep you safe if you choose to stay. The ledger is not practical, but people ask to read it anyway. The idea comforts them that architecture can express love, that buildings can learn manners. In the wide bowl of a dry lake, a community creates a festival of echoes every year. They stand at the rim and speak one sentence at a time into the empty space. The basin catches each line and throws it back softer. The rule is simple. Say only what you want the world to remember, because the world repeats it. People whisper thank you to lost friends, promise patience to the seasons, and tell the sky they will walk gently. When night falls, the basin holds the last echo like a pearl. A painter found a shipment of white enamel and covered an entire block of ruins with a coat of quiet brightness. Windows, pipes, doors, weeds, everything turned the same pale sheen. At dawn, the block glowed like a fresh page. Residents wrote with charcoal directly on the walls. Recipes, maps, jokes, apologies, lullabies. Each rainstorm washed the words away and asked for more. The neighborhood became a public diary that never finished a sentence. Hope thrives when it is allowed to be rewritten. Some settlements maintain an hour with no speech. At an agreed moment, conversations pause, trade halts, tools rest, and the only sounds permitted are wind, water, and breath. The hour is not law, it is courtesy, a reminder that the world deserves a turn to speak. Afterward, people resume their ordinary motions with hands that move more carefully. Silence teaches touch. On a clear night, a scholar of stars leads a group beyond the town's last lantern. She does not point out constellations with names. Instead, she invites each person to choose 3 lights and connect them into a story of their own. A hunter returns home, a river finds the sea, a door remembers how to open again. The sky becomes a library where every gaze writes a book. The lesson is simple. When maps are gone, imagination becomes the road. In a station where trains no longer run, a conductor keeps time with a bell as the sun sets. One tone for the day that passed, one for the day that may arrive, one for the day that never was but still matters. The bell rings low and round, rolling through the bones of the building until pigeons rustle like pages. No traveler boards. No departure is announced. Yet everyone who hears the bell feels that they have arrived somewhere gentle. Near the edge of a long, watchful desert, there is a wall of names. Not names of the dead, but names of those who were kind. A stranger who shared water, a neighbor who stayed to listen, a scout who walked ahead and returned with a safer path. The list changes as memory returns new examples. Children add chalk stars beside the names when they hear another story. The wall is never finished because the work it honors is never done. And beyond all these small museums and quiet stages, the wasteland itself remains the greatest exhibit, a living collection of patience. The wind curates dunes into delicate angles. Rivers frame reflections with a care no human hand can learn. Clouds carve galleries of shade across the face of hills. In the end, Fallout's world is not a place recovering from ruin. It is a place discovering how many forms beauty can take when no one demands that it last forever. As night folds over the land, the galleries close themselves. The wind chimes fall still. The glass prisms dim. The white walls wait for new words. The bowls cool under the soft chorus of insects. The blankets hold the day's warmth a little longer, then release it like a sigh. The people of the wasteland rest in a museum they built without blueprints, a museum that breathes, grows, and forgives. In darkness, another kind of art begins, sleeping. The world, too, participates. The earth hums low, the stars keep their posts, and somewhere a music box with no melody ticks a rhythm kind enough to carry every dream safely to morning.